Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Help, I Need an Intranet, but is SharePoint the answer? I'm George Kotzius at Interact, been at the company about 4.5 years, and I look forward to taking you through this webinar today. Before we get into this in too much detail, in the go-to interface that we'll be using for this, you do have the ability to ask questions in the questions drop-down. Please do ask as many as you'd like. We'll try and get onto a couple of these at the end of the session, but anything that we don't answer, we will follow up afterwards and make sure we cover that for you as needed. So let's go into why we're actually doing this session. We're aware from our research that a lot of organizations have done some really good SharePoint intranets in the past. Some of the best in the world have won some big awards have been done in SharePoint. And as Office 365, the whole suite of products that's contained with that has become more and more prominent in organizations, either already well in use or something that's being looked into right now. The question is, well, we get SharePoint Online with that already. Why do we use anything else for our intranet? Let's just use that. We've got it. It's a no-brainer, right? Well, let's dig a little bit deeper into that and look at some of the things that we found out and share our experience is on what the route might be for different organizations. So the way we're going to do that is cover the agenda in the following way. Let's actually introduce the options. We've established SharePoint is one of those. What about the out-of-the-box intranet? Let's use that as the basis for our comparison today. Let's cover a couple of SharePoint myths that we've heard when we've been out there. I think there's lots of different ones going around of what SharePoint is, what it isn't, how it works. Let's cover 3 of the more common ones that we hear when we're out talking to organizations. Let's try and conduct a little bit of a comparison, not so much of a feature type tick box, but let's consider the sort of activities that different contributors to the intranet might want to go through and how the different options might stack up in delivering those. And finally, we'll leave you with a bit of a route to deciding what is best for your organization. The conclusion today is not going to be that you shouldn't use SharePoint as an intranet, but go and figure out what it is that you do need to do and understand what the options are that are available to you. We'll send you away with some questions that you can ask your organization to try and help you down that route. So before we get into this too far, let's actually consider what a modern intranet should do. Now, this is quite a broad overview of what a modern intranet should do. We actually run a whole seminar on this topic because it can get quite complex, but fundamentally, an intranet is going to want to influence these high-level objectives, certainly a couple of them, if not all of them. Being able to communicate better with your staff is often a really high-level goal, helping them in the workplace be a bit more productive. But also the engagement piece, getting your staff to contribute, that kind of two-way communication in different engagement points as well. Peer-to-peer collaboration, knowledge bases, sharing ideas and information, as well as potentially impacting the culture of the organization, influencing what it's like to actually work for the organization. So in its simplest terms, this is what an intranet is going to try and deliver for an organization. And the reason out-the-box intranet products exist, the first of our options, is that they try to plug that gap in organizations that might struggle with a single product to deliver some of those needs that we talked about. Now, these out-the-box intranets, of which Interact is one of those, often are looking at acting as a central source for various contents. They want to be that central place to have information that's relevant to users and maybe link across to other areas of the business as well. Being that central storage place is often a key point. Typically, out-of-the-box intranets are quite quick to deploy. The functionality exists already. It's got dedicated internet functionality, as you can see. You're not building anything from scratch. It's a suite of tools that have been made purposely to try and influence those 5 objectives that we covered in the previous slide. Costs are normally quite visible with these products because they're often sold as a cloud subscription. You pay a per user rate that's maybe charged annually, and that covers the product, the hosting, the licensing, the support, maintenance, all of those different things. And an absolute fundamental part of this, which is really important, is typically these tools are built for non-IT professionals. This is the comms, HR, marketing individuals that these products have in mind. So this is typically what you're going to look at from an out-the-box intranet. So that brings us on to SharePoint. Let's actually figure out what SharePoint is before we get too far. Now, I think we've established that it can be used as an intranet. But the point is that this is fundamentally a dedicated document management system, a DMS. It's a platform designed to look after the documents across your organization, and it's really good at that. It's been tried and tested over tens of years as being a market-leading product in providing that. In relation to that, it is actually highly customizable. So it does provide a good solid foundation to develop upon. You want to tweak it and change it in certain ways that fit for you, you have the ability to do that. And because it's easily accessible due to its inclusion with Office 365, it's a product that's in almost all organizations that are Microsoft Office based. A key fundamental point here, though, is that this is a product managed by IT. It is a technical product, and it is within the remits of the IT team to maintain, administrate, and manage. So let's actually have a look at the digital workplace and see where these tools fit. There's a whole range of different tools available to organizations nowadays, impacting a whole range of different things across the business. SharePoint, as we've hopefully demonstrated, sits within the document management system area of a business. That's what it's designed to do. In comparison, you'll see the intranet is kind of sitting within this communications area, being able to tell people in the business about news and updates, announcements and things like that, having a search so they can find this information really easily, staff directories, connecting with people with similar expertise maybe, engagement tools, polling and questions, peer-to-peer recognition, mandatory reads, workflow, the whole range of different functionality that often sits within the out-the-box intranet option. And what these often do nowadays in good modern intranets is actually go, well, look, we've got this wide digital workplace. Let's not do all of this. Let's recognize what we're good at, this communication piece, but understand that actually you've got SharePoint set up already with some documents in there. Let's integrate with that. You're using Skype as your communication collaboration tool. Let's use that within the intranet. You've got other HR procedures in Workday or content in your CRM. Let's bring that across into the intranet. So often a good out-the-box intranet will act as a broad corporate layer to all the other different things in the organization. The big difference with SharePoint is that to deliver that, you need to build that functionality. There is a technical process you have to go through to turn that into this kind of high-level corporate layer. Okay, so now that we've kind of established what the different tools are in their most simple way, let's delve into this a little bit further by looking at some of the myths of SharePoint. Now, myth one is SharePoint is an intranet. Hopefully that's not a surprise. We've just covered that already, that SharePoint is a document management system. That is what it's designed to do. It's focused on that. It's not an intranet product. That doesn't mean it can't be an intranet, but it needs to be developed to get to that point, as we just established before. So what are the challenges and what's going to be involved in that process? Well, the first challenge is that development's actually hard. This is something you need to put a lot of resource in terms of technical expertise that normally sits within your IT team. Often, out-of-the-box intranets have similar kind of functionality that's already built, often with many years and ongoing development, that can do the core intranet functionality that you might need within your corporate intranet. SharePoint can get there, but it needs development and it needs IT to take the lead on. That's a challenge you're going to want to be aware of. What about flexibility? Particularly in the styling and branding of SharePoint and Office 365, often is reasonably limited. And also on the personalization side of things, users being able to select what they want. Out of the box normally has some really good features for that. Staff being able to watch and subscribe to different pieces of functionality across the site, be notified of specific things that relate to them, maybe dedicated home pages for different purposes, and also really flexible design, and that can be lined up with your corporate branding, maybe something completely different, and flexible layouts that are really easy to change. So if you are going to go down the route of SharePoint as an intranet, there are some limitations with this, and again, you'll need to get IT involved to help you out with that. And the final point is, what actually is the end product? What's the clarity we're going to get around what we're going to get out of this intranet? What about training to get to that place? How do we budget it? If you ask a developer what the intranet will be like if they build it in SharePoint, at an early stage, they're not going to be that sure. They'll have some ideas, but they couldn't show you anything. They couldn't really tell you exactly what it's going to be like. It's quite hard to say. An out-of-the-box provider will have functionality built already, and a good vendor should be able to show you the product with maybe an example theme of how it might look, some case studies that are going to relate to you, so that it's completely clear what you're going to get. Again, SharePoint could be really good, but the clarity of what you're going to get at the end is quite hard to say at the start. It needs a lot of investigation and a lot of effort. So let's look at the second, well actually, before we get into that, let's consider some of the outcomes. So it's all very well saying this is what's going to happen and this is some of the challenges that you're going to get as using SharePoint as an intranet, but let's actually consider some of the outcomes that we've seen in our research. There's three stats that I'd like to point out that I think show what SharePoint can do quite well. First one is that 40% of SharePoint implementations aren't successful. This was from some work by the Association for Information and Image Management, who did a SharePoint study in 2016. And the main problem here is that projects often fail. It takes a long time and it's hard to see those results. It can span a number of years potentially getting these projects up and running. And it's not clear what the goals are sometimes. There's a lot of project management issues there, but traditionally SharePoint is something that's quite hard to be successful. The evidence suggests it's a challenge. One of the key points from the same study was that 66% of users say it's too difficult to use. I think we can all agree that user experience is absolutely critical in most pieces of tools that you use. Certainly in your intranet that has lots of different touch points, lots of different needs it has to cover. If people aren't using it in a way that helps them, if they're not enjoying using it, if it's not helpful, they're not going to use it. So for people to be, 60% of people to be struggling with a platform is obviously a real difficult point you're going to want to challenge. And the final point is 46% of people found making updates problematic. This was from an Osterman research study. This is also difficult because the internet doesn't stop when you launch it. The work goes on moving forward because you need to make sure you maintain the content, you keep it up to date, and that people can actually do that. If they don't, the product and functionality will start to be less and less useful to the organizations. So if you are going to go down the route of a SharePoint intranet, take these results into account that we've seen proven to be happen, at least bear them in mind if you're going to go and go down the same route. Okay, so let's look at that second myth, which is SharePoint is free. I mean, it's included in Office 365, right? We talked about this before. We paid for that product already. We've got it in there. It's free. Let's just use it. Well, that's kind of true. The actual product is free, albeit you've paid a little bit for it, I suppose, because it's part of an Office 365 subscription. But most of the costs to it are often around the kind of associated costs, essentially getting the project complete. So let's look at what some of those might be. So the first one is the actual resourcing itself. We need developers to build this functionality. And that means if we're going to do it in-house, we've got to take that resource away from other products potentially. In terms of time to get this project up and running, the average project is much longer than out the box. The main reason for that is in both cases, you need to look at what content we're going to put on there, how we might choose to lay it out, what functionality we're going to use. That's true for both. But with the SharePoint option, you have to build that functionality first, whereas out the box, it's already available. So there's a time cost to deploying one over the other. And we mentioned it before, but that doesn't meet our specific needs. There isn't really a tangible product until we get to the end, until we get on our way to developing this. So sometimes it might look like we're doing what we need, get to the end, we've developed all this functionality, and actually things have changed, or we haven't quite figured it out right. It's not going to solve our needs. That's something that's always a bit of a cost if it does go wrong. There's the money side of it. So we may need to employ someone if we haven't got the initial resource in-house. Maybe we need to pay for someone if we haven't got the expertise. So there might actually be a direct cost associated with that. And as we said, if you've not got the expertise, you need to go out and hire it or get an agency to come into play. That's fine. But how do we maintain that in the future? One issue we've seen with a lot of self-build projects using SharePoint or otherwise is that the intranet looks great when it's been launched. Everyone's kind of happy with it, but a year down the line, that person's left or the agency's doing some other work and this isn't really a priority. And you find that the intranet's in a bad state, it's not being up to date, and we now don't have the in-house skills to properly maintain it. We've basically lost the value of our intranet in potentially quite a short period of time. So there's some of the costs that you're going to see that aren't necessarily it's going to cost X per year per user, but when you map this out in a cost-benefit analysis or start to try and quantify these, you'll see that they can add up to being quite significant, certainly with the risk of not necessarily getting what you want in the end. Let's look at the final myth, which is everyone has Office 365. This is sometimes quite a dangerous one because the business has it, but that doesn't mean every employee has it. Think about the types of employees that don't typically have work software licenses or maybe even email addresses. Some great examples are like these. You imagine you're a staff in retail. You work at a shared store. There's one PC in the back office that occasionally you log in to change your shift or book some holiday or something. That person might not even have a company email address. So if you want to deploy your intranet on SharePoint as part of your Office 365 subscription, you might find that a big portion of your staff don't even have access to that at all. You can go out and get licenses for Office 365 that do allow kind of light touch usage. So that absolutely is a route you can go down. But of course, there's going to be some cost and some effort along with that. It's definitely worth finding this point out. We're seeing more and more that organizations want to take a bit more of a holistic approach and engage all of their staff. They want everyone in the organization to feel like they're part of the business, to be updated, to feedback, to understand what's going on. And if you exclude a lot of those just because they don't have the technology, you potentially miss some of those key objectives. So it's definitely something worth checking out. So we looked at a couple of the myths of SharePoint, of what it kind of isn't, and we've covered a bit of what it is as well. But how do we actually decide what tool is right for the organization? Well, the way we're going to do this is look at a few use cases of what your standard contributors to the project, so your key departments, might want to do when they've got the intranet in place. So let's cover the first one, which is communications manager. So let's take Mandy. She's been in the organisation a while. She's really keen to share company news. She's really passionate about that, wants to help people engage with each other. But this person typically doesn't have tech skills. Their objective might be, I want to broadcast a useful update across the organisation or maybe even to a specific audience. So with an out-of-the-box product, she may be able to use some kind of pop-up message on the home screen. A lot of companies have this kind of broadcast type functionality. Maybe set up a page, a piece of content around that, and also push a notification out to the mobile app. That'd be the sort of thing that you might want to do in an out-of-the-box product that's built for this kind of person. If they want to do that same thing in SharePoint, they may be able to build a page, a piece of content within there, maybe make some basic layouts if they're using some of the kind of hub site, communication site type stuff, that there is a bit of functionality in SharePoint to maybe do that. But ultimately, anything beyond that, they need IT help. And actually being able to do targeted comms, so picking a group of people based on a department and attributes might be quite difficult with SharePoint. Let's look at Jane, our HR manager. She's really keen to help employees with their challenges. She wants to make sure people have access to the key information they need, but similar to Mandy in comms, not a technical person, doesn't have developer skills. People in HR and comms generally aren't employed because of that. That's not part of their role. They don't know how to develop, they don't know how to build technology, as most people don't in an organization. This person doesn't really have any need for that. Their goal is they want to create a specific area for onboarding, maybe help people with that, some core information there. So let's think about what they want to do. Well, they maybe manage a department, they want to keep the content up to date within that area. Maybe they want to add some video content, a welcome message from HR, a welcome message from the CEO, something along those lines. Use out-of-the-box functionality like mandatory read, so being able to create a piece of content that this new starter group specifically have to confirm that they've read. Maybe fire up a quick questions forum so people can ask the HR manager or ask the HR expert some questions. These are all features of most out-of-the-box tools, but in SharePoint, they're not there. They need to be developed, or you may need to get another product as part of the Office 365 suite to fill that gap. So there's a bit more work involved. So certainly from HR comms, we said this right at the start, out-of-the-box tools are generally built for these people. It's going to be much easier for them to do their objectives within that type of functionality. As we get into operations, things might change a little bit. This person is worried about data loss and security. They want to make sure staff are compliant, but also keep productivity goods, keep things integrated and keep things efficient. So there's kind of really two areas that they're going to be interested in, making sure there's a good site architecture so people can get to things, but also the content is safe and secure as well. So maybe having flexible process to lay things out in a certain way, to integrate with other things, to point people in different directions is key for them, and that's quite easy to do in out the box. Helping them with updates around content, so making sure content authors are reminded on a set date to keep their policy and procedures up to date. SharePoint might also help them with this as well, because it provides a really good, strong, secure place to store your documents. That's what it's designed to do. So this person actually might be quite happy storing their content in there. So there's a bit of crossover in out the box and SharePoint in terms of helping this person's objectives, which ultimately is to make sure key policies and procedures are easily available. Now let's just take account of the user for a second, because I think this is a really important distinction, is that ultimately this is who it's for. So let's have a think about one of those hard to reach employees that maybe don't even have access to SharePoint in this case. Either way, they generally have limited access to business systems. They might have a mobile phone, company-wise, or certainly one that they have themselves, and generally not interested in computer stuff, not interested in computer systems. What they want to do is talk and collaborate with their colleagues in similar roles. They want to swap shifts with their other delivery drivers. They want to share their experiences. They want to fill in a really quick form to report an issue and not have to ring 10 people to get to the end of that. So a bit of engagement, a bit of productivity here as well. So from a user perspective, having something like a good, strong user experience and user interface is really important for this type of person. But in this case, maybe a nice mobile app experience could be really key. And good out-of-the-box vendors will have a good quality app to go along with their product that we've already mentioned can be fine-tuned to be user intuitive and helpful to user groups. What you might find with SharePoint is they may need multiple different apps and access to all sorts of different tools. It might be a more clunky experience. It's always worth bearing these users in mind. Now, when we get to IT, we're definitely more in the territory of someone who's comfortable with SharePoint. They're interested in network performance, making sure it's working really well, access and safety, so can people get access to different systems and are we safe and secure? And this user is technically skilled. People within this group probably have the ability to build within SharePoint or other similar tools. And ultimately, this group has probably put a lot of effort into creating a SharePoint environment. If they have deployed it already, it'll give them a lot of confidence that their documents are stored safely and in the right way. One thing that's worth mentioning, though, is while security is key for this group, most respected out-of-the-box providers will have put a lot of effort and time into ensuring they have a really strong and secure cloud offering with all the relevant data protection and security being a key aspect. Good example for us is that we have ISO 27001 accreditation, which we worked hard to prove to organizations that your data is safe, and real top-class enterprise level hosting. So if you are an IT person that is concerned with making sure your documents are safe and secure and make sure the environment works, go and speak to the out-the-box providers that you may be looking at this stage and consider how they are set up. Ask them the tough questions of how their network is set up for its use, how you can authenticate, what security measures they've got in place. You might find that actually there's some good quality stuff there. If you're looking at this from a comms HR perspective and you've got a project coming up, get IT involved. Go and tell them to speak to these people. Don't try and ignore it. Tackle this point head on and make sure that IT are happy with whatever route they go down. They might be right now comfortable with SharePoint. That doesn't mean another provider won't actually tick their boxes once they take a look at it. Ultimately, though, it still comes back to this point of the concerns from IT of we're Microsoft first, we've worked on our security, it's kind of our responsibility ultimately, versus comms, HR, marketing going, yeah, but what about engagement? What about this ease of use? Maybe we're running with this project and we care about content and design. So this kind of goes back to the point at the start that a good intranet can do the comms piece really well, but it does work with other tools in the digital workplace that actually might help overcome this sort of thing. And SharePoint integration is a common one that often comes up, and most good providers will have functionality out the box. So why not use out the box as a layer to help your comms team meet the things that they need, but at the same time go, well, look, we've got SharePoint, we set that up really well. There's a lot of documents in there that we're happy with how they're stored. Let's keep that, but select certain files that we can find from the intranet. So we're now just pointing people towards those files where they are properly maintained in an environment we're happy with, but now we're also solving some of those other comms, engagement, cultural issues that we wanted to achieve at the start. So what's right for you? Well, we've kind of established the different needs. We're in the comms HR space. It's all about telling staff about things, company news and updates, initiatives, fast onboarding, knowledge capture, really conducive to out-the-box intranets because that functionality exists already and is really built for that to help them with that. As we get into operations and IT, we might be asking the question, well, we've already got this safe environment that works and actually that meets some of my needs. Great, there's actually some tools in an out-the-box option that might go a bit further to help us with that, but we want to see a bit of evidence that that's going to be respected. So get them involved, go look at some of the out-of-the-box providers you might be looking at, and you might find that actually we can tick most of those boxes, but as I say, let's integrate with the other systems. If not, let's have those connection points instead. Despite all of that, what it has to come down to at the end is the user themselves. This is what the tool is for. Let's give them a really good user experience. If we don't, the project's going to fail, as we looked at some of those stats before. If we don't actually help them to do their job in some way and maybe find it interesting, then we're going to struggle having some success out of this. So how do you actually figure out what is right for you? What can you do to establish that? Well, let's look at some questions that you can go away and ask. The first one is, what is the primary objective of the intranet? We talked about those high-level goals right at the start, those 5 different things: communication, productivity, engagement, collaboration, and culture. You're going to be tackling those for sure with your intranet, and we'd obviously encourage you to look at those in a bit more detail. But if we're trying to improve our communications, then an out-of-the-box product is probably much better than trying to build something around a document management system. Similarly, how much of our workforce has access to the systems? Normally those that are desk-based, how many are spread out in front line? If we've got a lot in the field, maybe a mobile app, mobile-first type approach might be suitable. We might want to make sure they actually have access to our Office 365 and SharePoint environment if we're going to go down that route. Who's going to be the day-to-day owner of this? I think this is a critical question that you need to ask. We mentioned right at the start that out-the-box tools are predominantly built for comms and HR and marketing professionals. SharePoint is built for IT professionals because they generally meet different needs. If the owner of this project is going to be the comms department, as it often is, with help from HR, for example, and they're going to be day-to-day adding content, managing this, then an out-the-box approach makes much more sense. If actually it's IT that are owning this project, they've outlined some development resource, and the key thing for them is to keep everything within SharePoint, then maybe SharePoint makes more sense. Try and establish that at the start. How much time and money do you have to invest in intranet and its upkeep? We talked about the clear costs of out-the-box. Doesn't necessarily mean it's cheaper. It just means that the costs are quite fixed and quite clear of what you're actually going to cost. Mapping that against SharePoint and how you develop that is quite difficult. You need to consider a whole range of things. So map that out, figure out not just the investment from a monetary value, but the time, the resource, and the efforts that need to go into this. Do a bit of a cost-benefit analysis around that point. How accessible is training to your employees? As we looked at with one of our stats, SharePoint often isn't that liked by users. It's quite difficult to use. At least bear that in mind in your design and what you're trying to use it for, but also about training. Let's make sure we do train employees in that, and that people that are going to be maintaining the site in particular have the skills to manage it and maintain it. And finally, how important are regular new features and functionality added? This is a big differentiator as well with out the box. Generally, you're paying for an organization that has a full roadmap and support and maintenance plan that will increase features and functionality, make changes, modernize, change the interface to ensure that they have a modern and up-to-date product. With SharePoint, that's fine, but you need to actually build a lot of that yourself. Who's going to be responsible for maintaining that in the long term? So don't just think of it from going up to launch. Think of it in terms of a long-term product. What I would suggest, though, is, go and ask different people about this in the business. Don't just rely on just 1 or 2 people. Go and do your research. Speak to some of the people sponsoring the project and actually find out what are our objectives, what are the approach we're going to take, who's owning it, and really try and figure out what the best option could be. So in summary, I think we've established that SharePoint is a DMS. That's what it's designed to do, but it can be an intranet. It has a flexible approach. It has the ability to do that, but it needs some IT involvement and a bit of development to get there. Key difference is out the box, which are designed specifically for the purpose of an intranet, and particularly for those with non-technical backgrounds. There are grey areas, though, as we mentioned. You need to go and ask those questions and figure out what is right for your organization. What I'd encourage you to do is, if you are considering a project, go and look at both options. At the early stage, do a bit of research into what could we get out of SharePoint, how much might it cost, what effort and time we're going to need, versus what is the cost for a out-of-the-box option and what might that look like. Let's look at the functionality, let's look at how that could fit our needs, and do a bit of an assessment of both, and then you can always narrow it down a bit further after that. Okay, so great. Well, thanks for everyone's time. I'm going to cover maybe just one question. We've not got too much longer left, but we will tackle anything else that's been brought up. So, okay, let's have a quick look at the questions. Give me 1 second. Right, so there's a few here. I'll just pick a couple off the top. Sam says, an out-of-the-box product would be another system. How to integrate? Okay, so integration is quite a broad concept. It really depends on what you're actually looking to integrate with. A question back could be, well, exactly that. What are you looking to integrate it with? As I tried to show at the start in the kind of digital workplace slide, an intranet has out-the-box intranet functionality. What most good systems realize is that you're using a range of tools in your digital workplace. So we have a pre-built connector for SharePoint, for example, as I mentioned a couple of times. Keep your documents safe in there, but how do people find it? How do you, improve the experience in a better way for the intranet? Have a good layer on top of that, and bring some of those files in from a kind of linking perspective. So you can definitely integrate with that. And the same thing, there's other functionality I mentioned, like Workplace and Salesforce and Skype. Most good internet products will recognize that they need to have some APIs and some integration facilities available. So yes, it will be a separate product, but it will have options, or at least good products will have options to kind of seamlessly connect them to other tools and give a good impression to your users. But when they hit the intranet, they have access to all the things across the business that they need. We've got time for one more as well. It's a really short question from Chantel, which says, what about hub sites? So we didn't talk too much, I briefly mentioned this, we didn't talk too much about the exact functionality of SharePoint, but they have created what's called a hub site, which can kind of help bring together multiple sites within SharePoint with a bit of a nicer front end that's trying to kind of help people have a better feel for the content. So it's definitely a step forward, I think, for SharePoint to kind of help piece together a bit of a better user experience. There's still quite a lot of challenges with this. I think it relates back to most of the points we've talked about. It's trying to almost become intranet homepage sub-area type functionality, which it's not really. It's quite quite rigid in its flexibility. So you still have to manually kind of choose what you promote. You don't really get to filter between the different types of content and lay it out in a certain way. I'm not an expert on exactly how these are put together, but the point is it does need a lot of management, a lot of effort, definitely some training for kind of comms people to use it, but also probably a lot of involvement from IT. So it's a good extra feature to use, I think. Is it going to solve the wider reaching problems? Definitely not. Again, something you can probably take a look at when you benchmark your options against each other. Great, so I think that's enough time on the webinar for today. If we've got some more questions, I'll get them responded to following this. What I'll suggest is, if you've enjoyed today's session, that you download a guide from our website called Interact versus SharePoint. We go into a lot more depth in some of the specific features. We've got a tick box exercise there of if you want to do this, how you do it in Interact and how you do that in SharePoint. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And also, if you'd like to hear more from us, we'd always be happy to set up a call with you, discuss your project at a really high level, give some of our input as to how an out-of-the-box solution might work. And if you're at the stage where you're ready to take a look at products, we'd be happy to do a demo for you as well. So please follow up with us if that's the case. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's webinar. So thanks so much for your time.